And so I thought, well, there's no way I have breast cancer. And ultimately, all of that pain and suffering and distress and what it multiplied so greatly that I thought, okay, I am really at rock bottom here. I mean, I feel so deflated in life. I feel like, okay, my beauty's now going to be gone. My external value is gone. Who will love me? Who am I? Well, my name is Christine Handy, and I am called the Cancer Disruptor for a lot of reasons, a lot of very good reasons. I do like to disrupt the beauty space as a whole. On a personal level, I have two beautiful sons, 24 and 21 years old, respectively. Well, I call myself a self-proclaimed athlete. So I love sports. I like to be on the sand, usually walking. And I like to play tennis and paddle sports and row and things like that. And so I was raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and I started modeling there when I was 11 years old. So I ended up doing well in the modeling space for many, many years. Ultimately, I stopped modeling when I was diagnosed with cancer. Of course, I didn't think I would ever go back to it, but I ended up going back for a different reason. Now, I really loved the modeling space. Of course, it has different issues within the industry. Of course, some of them permeated into my own life. I dealt with an eating disorder when I was quite young. But as a whole, modeling to me felt very safe because I'd been in that industry for so long. And so when I ultimately lost my chest in 2020, subsequent to my breast cancer diagnosis and implants and mastectomies, I ended up going back into the modeling space at 50 years old because I felt like there was a need to show on a bigger platform and with all the resources that I have, that women without chest, their beauty is not lost. You are still whole. And our self-esteem is what keeps us whole. Our faith is what keeps us whole. It's not external beauty or external things like materials. And so I took that opportunity in 2020 to say to my modeling agency and to my manager, I'd like to go back into modeling, and this is how I want to do it. Of course, now I was 50 years old and with a concave chest, but I found my way into fashion shows and in front of designers and said, my name is Christine Handy. I'm the beauty disruptor, the cancer disruptor. I've been a model for 40 years and I'd like to walk in your show in February because there's women that need to see this. There's women that need to see somebody with a concave chest in the largest runway show in the world. That matters. And that took a lot of courage and bravery, but I felt like I had it inside of me and people, again, needed to see that. So that's a little bit of the history of my modeling career and why I continue to do it. Well, I was 41. And like I said, I was a self-proclaimed athlete and a model and young enough and didn't have any family history. And I felt kind of immune to getting cancer. Why would anybody like me get cancer? I was allergic to sugar. And, you hear, oh, well, sugar promotes cancer and these types of things. And I didn't fit the box. And so it didn't occur to me that I was going to have breast cancer. And so when I was in New York for a doctor's appointment, I had just had a fused arm from a unfortunate incident with another medical issue, not cancer. And I was in the shower of a hotel and my arm was hanging out of the shower because I have this huge cast on. And now my wrist was just rebuilt with cadaver bones and a cadaver Achilles tendon. And so I was kind of used to having my arm out of the shower, but I wasn't used to using soap. I would just pour liquid soap over my shoulder and let it run down my body and wash my body. But in this particular hotel, they didn't have any liquid soap. So I took the bar of soap and I washed my left breast and I immediately felt a lump on right beneath the surface of my breast. And so I thought, well, there's no way I have breast cancer. Again, I have no symptoms. I have no family history. I have no reason to believe that. Ultimately, 5 days later, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. Yeah. And the ironic part, well, there's so many ironic parts, which, sometimes you have to think about the irony in things and think, well, maybe there's purpose to this. And so for me, I was diagnosed on October 1st, which is the first day of breast cancer. So instead of looking at it as, okay, now I'm going to be tortured for the whole month, seeing it all over, the media and NFL and the pink socks and the pink this. And I thought, well, there must be a reason for me to be diagnosed on the first. And the other thing is I wasn't able to digest the fact that I just had a fused arm. And now I was facing chemotherapy, which had to be postponed for 30 days because if they had started the chemotherapy, the cadaver bones, the cadaver grafts in my arm would have dissolved. So I thought, well, this is some sick joke, right? Now I have cancer. Now I can't even treat it. And so that started a whole new level of duress, right? Into my psyche, into my emotional state. And ultimately all of that pain and suffering and distress and what it multiplied so greatly that I thought, okay, I am really at rock bottom here. I mean, I feel so deflated in life. I feel like, okay, my beauty's now going to be gone. My external value is gone. Who will love me? I'm now handicapped in my right arm, and now I'm facing 28 rounds of chemo. I have no idea if I'm going to get through this. I wanted to leave. I don't know where I was going to go, but I wanted to run away, maybe go to Europe for a while, go into hostels, just disappear, not take my cell phone, let my ex-husband take care of my kids, and nobody could find me. I wouldn't have to start any treatment. I could figure out how to deal with my arm. That occurred to me. I thought about that a lot. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I handled it with grace in the beginning. I was very scared. I lived a very pampered life prior to my diagnosis, and I was very afraid of the impact, the emotional impact. I was already depleted when I was diagnosed with cancer. I had an infection in my arm for 7 months that was untreated. And ultimately my arm was fused. And so now I have cadaver bones that are trying to adhere to my body and I'm trying to figure out how to live a life being handicapped. But from a physical standpoint, my body was depleted. My hair was already thinning, and that was from my arm issue. And so to go into chemotherapy depleted, and I was already underweight because of that. And so when I went in to see my oncologist for the first time, I think this is a great story. I at that point, I didn't trust a lot of doctors because my arm doctor really had disappointed me. And so when I went to see my oncologist, I had already decided I'm not going to trust him. I just was like, I'm not trusting doctors. They are not honest. Now my arm is fused. I trusted this guy. He was supposedly the best doctor, and now he's let me down. And he bullied me. There was some emotional aspect to it. And so I just had my guard up. And growing up, I was taught that doctors were to be revered. Doctors were to be respected regardless of what they said. And as a woman, there was even more pressure, right? And because I would see my dad talk to his doctors, and his doctors would respond differently to my father than they would do to my mother. And I accepted that. Well, when that happened to my arm, it became unacceptable. But here was the problem. It was inside of me. I didn't have a very high self-esteem. My self-esteem had gotten chipped away for years in my life, in my profession. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, part of my panic was, well, I have nothing to offer the world because I'm losing my beauty, which is all that people care about. Well, that was a self-esteem issue, right? And so going back to the medical field, in order to be an advocate for yourself, you have to have a strong self-esteem. I didn't have a strong self-esteem, so I wasn't advocating for myself. So you walk into these appointments and you're diagnosed with cancer, so you're totally vulnerable. And here's the other problem. A lot of doctors are on a time, right? Okay, you got 5 minutes. And you can sense that. Like, no, they're not going to tell you that, but you can sense that. And so you feel this pressure like, okay, well, I better ask this really quickly. And I don't want to ask too many questions because, he may get annoyed with me. That all goes back to self-esteem. We should be able to sit in that office as long as we are getting the answers that we deserve. We're the patient. That is definitely changing in our world, but it takes sad stories like my arm for that to change, for people like me to stand up and go, no, this is unacceptable. Well, I took back my voice. I took back the power of the thoughts that I had. Instead of saying to myself, I don't know what I used to call myself, but that wasn't nice things. I changed those tapes in my head and I started to say to myself, you're worthy of love. You're worthy of doctors. You're worthy of time. You're worthy of this attention. So you've got to build your self-esteem in order to be an advocate for yourself. And that's a daily process. So the first time I saw my oncologist, I walked in the office and he said, "Oh, you're the girl with the arm." And he immediately diffused my fear, my anxiety, my walls already started to come down because he knew my story. He took the time to make a joke about it, right? And it was endearing. And so I immediately started to trust him. And he basically said to me on that appointment, "You're not going to like me because you're going to go through a lot of chemotherapy and your body is already broken down." And he said, "And there are going to be moments where you and your friends and your family are going to think that I'm killing you or the chemo is killing you." And he said, "It's going to feel like that. But when you're done, you're going to be done because I don't ever really want to see you again." And so it was that kind of brash honesty, but also kindness, right? To say, "I don't really want to see you around here anymore." That really stuck with me. And so I thought, okay, I get it. I'm going to go through a lot of hell, but if I can just survive this, I'm going to survive life, right? I'm going to be here to tell the story. And that gave me hope. So I think when we take hope away from people, I think when people are giving a diagnosis and say, "Oh, go get your affairs in order," that takes away hope. When hope is lost, what do we have, right? The bags and the gifts and the accolades from society and the success, that makes no difference. But if we take our hope away, we have nothing. So he gave me hope. And then so I stuck with that. And even on the darkest moments where after my mastectomy and after 18 rounds of chemotherapy, I was able to get a mastectomy, and then I had more chemo. And then after my third revision of my mastectomy and after, my faulty implant, there were many, many surgeries where I thought, okay, this is the last one. And then they kept going. Even though they kept going, I felt hope. And I think that's the biggest reason why I like to share my story, because it is a story of hope and we can't take hope away. And so when I hit rock bottom, I had a choice. And the choice was, you can either be a victim or you can be a vine. You can either show courage to yourself and your community and to your family, or you can show despair. And you can also show compassion to yourself, or you can show pity to yourself. And so I went through this mental gymnastics of like, do I really want to show pity? I kind of did in the beginning. Do I really want to show compassion to myself? I'm kind of mad. And so I had to really dig out of this hole with a lot of grace for myself, with a lot of courage, because I was facing a ginormous amount of distress and changes in my life, and a lot of questions whether I was going to live or die. And so for the next 15 months of chemotherapy, because I was in chemo for 15 months, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of introspective work and saying to myself, okay, well, if you do get out of this, if the outcome comes to, your survival, then let's try to let's not try to survive, let's try to thrive. And so I have had no shortage of complications. I've had about 23 non-elective surgeries in the past 11 years. I've had 28 rounds of chemo. I've had many complications from chemo. I lost 3 teeth because chemo gets in healthy cells as well. I have heart issues from chemotherapy. I have liver spot from chemotherapy. And so I see doctors regularly, not just my oncologist for checkups. I see multiple doctors, and that can wear you down. I had an implant issue and ultimately a MRSA infection in my chest. So my implants had to be excavated. But through all of the complications, I've said to myself, how can we use this? How can I help people with this new complication, with this new story of pain? So I feel like my journey is, had a lot of ups and downs, but in general, I feel like I've lived a very lucky life. my personality wasn't so attractive before I was diagnosed with cancer. I was very self-serving and I was very materialistic, and I kind of filled myself up on what society wanted from me. And so to go from that to living a life of serving and altruism, there's quite a transformation. I feel very lucky. I feel very privileged.